In this section, we are discussing a very important concept related to DOM and web, that is, what is event bubbling and event capturing. The category of this question is DOM or web. We will have 5 relative questions related to this topic. Let's begin with the answer. To understand bubbling or capturing, I will create a simple program and then we try to explore. Here I have written a code where there is a division, and inside the division I have just a simple button. On division click, I am calling a function called div click, and on button click I am calling a function called btn click. Both the functions are just displaying alert that division is clicked or button is clicked. If we observe the output here, we have this division and the button. Button is actually a child element of division, and both division and button have on click. Now when I click on this button, I get that message that button is clicked. But when I proceed further, I see that division click is also called. Remember, here I am just clicking on the button, not on the division. Still, the division click is called. Let me go back to the coding once again and show you that what have we written here. Button on click, this function is getting called. Division on click, this function is called. And when I clicked on this, it actually called both the functions. So why this thing is happening? In the output, it executes the button's click event, but immediately after that, it executes division's click event as well. This is the bubbling. Let's try to understand this with reference to DOM event architecture. This figure is a replica of the code we have written. Here, the button which is raising the event is called as the target. The event object does have a property with the same name, that is event.target, which returns the reference of the element which generated the event, or in other words, which dispatched the event object. That means the event object is dispatched. To get the clear idea, let's try a code sample. I will just give a name to this button. I'll say btn1. And here when the button is clicked, I will display that. I'll say alert event.target.name. Now we have given the name property here. So let's see what happens here. I'll just refresh the code. I'm clicking the button. Now you see that it displays btn1 and then the rest of the behavior, of course. So event.target returns the reference of element which raised the event, and that's the place from the event object is dispatched to its ancestor. Now I'm coming to that, what ancestor is. Alright, so coming back to the figure, this button is the event target. This division is called ancestor or parent, which goes till window, and window is the topmost ancestor, or actually it's an object. You can't say that window is part of DOM. It is above it, but we need here for more clarity. So from target to ancestor, the event object traverses, and this traversal is called as propagation or event propagation. Now how is the event propagation happening, or which is the path of event propagation? Of course, bottom to top, and that's what we saw. First the button was clicked, then the button click was fired, and then the division click was also fired automatically. So this button's event is executed and then it goes on the ancestor, because the propagation is dispatched from bottom to top, and that's what is a bubble. A bubble has a tendency to go up from the bottom, and that's why we say that this is event bubbling. And the default path of event propagation is bottom to top. This is the behavior of event management in JavaScript. In case if you want to stop this behavior, that is, you want that when the button is clicked, it should not propagate the event to its ancestors. You can use this using a method called stop propagation, which is a method of event object. So you can say event.stop propagation. Let's try that practically. I'll just remove this. saving it, going back to the output, refreshing, and just bringing the previous code again, where when you click on the button event is fired and the division event is also fired. Now let's say we do not want this propagation to happen. Then here I will say event dot stop propagation. That's it. I'll save it here. Coming back to the browser, refreshing, and button clicked. The button clicked is fired and no division click is available now because we have stopped the propagation behavior. So again, the default propagation path is bottom to top or bubbling, and that's what event bubbling is. That is, the event object is dispatched on a path that is bottom to top. In case if you want to change this default propagation path, that is, instead of bottom to top, we make it top to bottom, then that will be called capturing. And for capture phase, you have to use add event listener method to configure or bind the event. Capturing phase means top to bottom, that is reverse to the bubbling. This also means in our code, when the button is clicked, first the division click will be fired and then the button click. Let's do this practically. Here I will say window.onload because I'm going to bind the events using add event listener. This is one of the way to write the event. Now we do not need this on click anymore here. So I'm going to remove these things. Both the click events we don't want. I don't even want this name. Here we will take two variables. I'll say const btn1, and inside that I'm going to get the reference of button. So again I'll say btn1 here, and I'll say div1, and that will be again div1. Now we need to give these IDs as well. So for div I will say ID is equal to div1, and for button I just say btn1. So we have reference of both btn1 and div1 in these objects. Now comes the event binding part using add event listener. I'll say btn1 dot add event listener. Now this method takes three parameters. First is the event. Remember, we write click. We do not write on click here. That's how the syntax is. The second is which function you want to call. So this is the button. So I want to call a function called btn click. So that will come here. And the last parameter is true or false. This actually decides, the last parameter, that you want to have the bubble phase or you want to have the capture phase. By default, if you do not specify, let's say you pass only two parameters, then it will be bubble phase by default. But if you want to make it capture phase, then you will say true here. Let's also attach the event with division. For this also I'll say click, and div click is the function I want to call, and here also I just want to say true. So now there are two events and both are going to execute from top to bottom. This means when I click on the button, the capture phase will start. Event object will be dispatched from top to bottom. So the first will be div1 click and then the button click, right? Let's save this, go back to the output. I will just refresh the browser and clicking on the button only. Amazing. It displays div click first and then it displays the button clicked. Because the event object is dispatched, the propagation path is changed now. It is from top to bottom, that is capturing. So this is event capturing, and by default it is event bubbling. In short, all these concepts are related to event propagation path. There are few events which do not get propagated, like focus events, but it's a kind of exception. Otherwise, events do bubble by default. Do not think that this bubbling or capturing behavior is weird or bad. It is designed intentionally. This type of behavior can also be useful when you have deep level elements and assume that you want to handle event at one point only. Bubbling or capturing actually facilitates you with one of the most powerful event handling pattern called event delegation, which will be our next section's topic. Now let's discuss relative questions of this topic. The first question is, which is the default propagation path? So now you know, first of all, you should know what is propagation, and then which is the default path. It is of course bottom to top, that is bubbling. The second question, how can you stop event propagation? So we have seen that event.stop propagation method that helps us to stop the propagation. The third question is, how can you change the default propagation path? So this is where we use the add event listener, and the third parameter of add event listener, we make it true to make sure that instead of going bottom to top, it goes top to bottom, that is the capturing phase. The fourth question is, how can you get the reference of element on which the event is fired, or the reference of element which raised the event? So that we get using event.target. We can use event.target.name, event.target.value for that matter. So whichever element has the focus, that element's value we can refer using event.target.value as well. And the fifth question can be that the code which we saw earlier, that can be given, and then one can ask you that what will be the output of this code and why. So you can discuss about the bubbling happening by default in the DOM architecture.